Yeah, I feel a little bit bad because so far everyone has provided so many practical insights into engagement. I have nothing practical to share with you, and it's very conceptual, it's very theoretical. So I hope it's interesting, but it's not going to be useful in your day to day. The other thing that I have to apologize for up front is that I'm not going to be sharing anything about what The Guardian does because that would be practical, and. But I'm pretty sure that The Guardian does whatever anyone has mentioned is a good idea. We just do it better because we're British. At least that's the way I'm. I haven't been there for very long, and so I'm still trying to figure out what's the difference between the Guardian personality and the British personality. I'm not sure I'm totally finding that distinction. But anyway, I'm at The Guardian now. I started in September. I was at Google for a few years before that. It was a few years ago I went to Google because I wanted to save journalism. Yeah, so that was the plan. I was going to go to Google. I wanted to save journalism. The point was Google basically manages the digital economy on behalf of the world, and so why not work for the manager of that digital economy? Because in order for me to have a role in trying to save journalism, it wasn't going to be as a journalist because journalists have to work really hard, and I try and avoid that. So I was going to be focusing on the business models of journalism, and what better way to do that than work for the company that basically manages the digital economy? Now, my first job at Google was running news partnerships for YouTube because I thought video is awesome, and the monetization around video is so much more fun than display, or more so than search, and so YouTube's really cool. And so I was at YouTube for a couple years, and then I realized that YouTube wasn't going to play a material role in the economics of the journalism industry anytime soon, and so I moved into a role that was kind of an internal strategy team at Google, where I was focused on global alliances and strategic partnerships with media companies. I was most interested in the news media companies, but I was looking at all the media companies. And in our team, the focus of our team was really to look across all the product areas and make sure that we were strategically aligned in terms of all of the partnerships and business development that we would do with any given media company that was on a small list of important companies that we had to make sure we managed those relationships very carefully. But what I learned was that when I was at YouTube, I learned a little bit about social platforms, and I was really wanting to have a role in the journalism economy, and what I learned at YouTube was that the nature of journalism may be different on a social platform than what it has been on previous platforms. And what I mean by that is I've heard it said that the role of the journalist is to give us the information that we need to be free and self-governing. And I think that's true, but on social platforms, it's changed to, I think, mean the role of the journalist is to facilitate a conversation about the information that we need to be free and self-governing. And the thing that makes social platforms so powerful is that they allow for that conversation to scale infinitely because it's an asynchronous conversation. So on Facebook or on Twitter or on YouTube, you can have a conversation with an infinite scale because it's asynchronous. It's not in real time. If it's in real time, then I'm limited to having a conversation with only as many people as actually can be engaged in that conversation in real time. If it's asynchronous, it can scale infinitely. And so Twitter, it feels like you're engaged in a conversation with thousands, if not millions of people, because it allows for that. And so I think the role of the journalist in a social environment is to facilitate the conversation about the information that is required to be free and self-governing. But the problem is that this engagement on platforms that we don't own as publishers makes for a really tough business. Because we don't get to sell that inventory, we don't get to leverage that inventory, we don't get to know much about our audience that's there. It makes for a very, very, very tough business. So while engagement on social platforms is fundamentally required in terms of growing the audience that you're trying to engage with on the stories that you're trying to tell, the more successful you are at doing it, the harder it is to actually make money. And there are two fundamental challenges that I kind of zeroed in on that were a function of this dynamic. One is that when we get our traffic, when we get our audience from search and social channels, like if we get it from Google Search, or if we get it from Facebook Shares, or if we get it from Twitter, and then it shows up on our platform that we do get to monetize, we don't know much about this audience that has just shown up on our platform that we do get to monetize. And so since we don't know much about the audience, we can't monetize it for very well. We can't tell an advertiser, this is the nature, this is the demographic, this is the psychographic, this is the location, these are the things that they'll want to pay extra for the sake of being able to communicate with that audience. We don't know these things when we get this traffic, when we get this audience to show up to our platforms from social platforms and from search. So that's a real challenge. The other one is if we were to monetize on those platforms, in the case of YouTube monetization, it's non-material, which is like a technical accounting term for it kind of sucks. Or if it's on Facebook, it's non-existent, which if non-material kind of sucks, you can imagine what non-existent feels like. So we can't monetize very well off-platform. We can't leverage information that comes from deriving traffic from our engagement on those platforms on our platform. So what are we to do? How are we going to grow this business? Now, it's clear that every day, between Google and Facebook, they control a larger percentage of all that is the digital conversation. Twitter's there as well. Other digital platforms pop up. None of these digital platforms are designed for the purpose of journalism. They're designed for the purpose of facilitating conversations. News organizations are designed for journalism, and so now we can do as much as we want on our platform to try and improve the ability to engage on our websites and apps. We can make them extraordinarily engaging, although the scaled conversation is always going to be happening on these platforms that are not intended for journalism. So while it's always important to try and be increasing the engagement on the platforms that we own and operate, we have to realize that every day that conversation's really happening someplace else. And if it's happening someplace else, how do we monetize it? So I don't have any answers for that. So I'm done. Yeah. No, but I have a couple ideas. One is we have to, as an industry, start figuring out what does it mean to leverage second-party data. And by second-party, I mean you have such a thing as first-party data, which is the information that you know about your audience that is derived from their behavior on your owned and operated sites and apps that you gather, and you kind of develop user profiles that you can use in your monetization strategies. There's third-party data, which is that kind of nefarious underworld of data that you can buy and kind of glom onto your monetization platform so that your advertisers will have a better sense for what it is that they're buying. But this notion of second-party data, where if we have a platform, a social platform that is engaging with our audience, and we have the need to actually monetize that more effectively, which requires an understanding of who these people are, can we find a way to align our interests so that there is this second-party data that can be leveraged in the context of monetization? Or that can be leveraged in the context of product innovation? So one of the things that I'm really eager for our industry to try and figure out is how can we appropriately, with privacy concerns in mind, how can we appropriately build systems that allow for the digital economy to operate in a way that allows us to leverage second-party data? Can we set up a structure that aligns the interest of the platform, Facebook, Google, Twitter, whoever it is, with the interest of the publisher, so that an advertiser has the ability to actually understand a little bit more about the audience that they're buying, and that the publisher has the ability to understand a little bit more about the product that they're designing for this audience? So how can we leverage second-party data as an industry? The second thing that I think we need to figure out how to do a better job of as an industry is advocating for stronger control over the resulting monetization off-platform. And so what I mean by that is when a big digital social platform wants to leverage the fact that we are the creators of the most important, if not the most awesome content in the world on a daily basis, when they want to leverage that content, how do we as an industry need to establish expectations that allow for us to control the resulting monetization? Now, control doesn't necessarily mean that we actually have to be the ones to do the actual selling of that inventory. I come at it from a, looking at spreadsheets background where it's about yield optimization. And so, one of the things that I really like about YouTube these days is that they're expanding who is allowed to sell and serve against their YouTube audience. When I was there, it was something that I felt like I was Don Quixote in the wilderness, constantly asking for, monetization rights and ad server integrations for my news partners, and it just wasn't set up to do that at the time. Now they're starting to expand that, and I think that that's awesome. I would like for other massive social platforms to take a note from that development and make sure that if they're going to be launching things that are intended to require our awesome content in their awesome platform, that they then also launch it in a way that allows us to optimize the yield against the resulting inventory. So that might mean that the partner sells it. Now, one of the things that I will say about working for The Guardian is we have an amazingly awesome commercial operation, and so I'm always interested in trying to increase the volume of inventory that they have to sell because they sell it really well. And if they had more, they would sell more really well. So I would love to take inventory from partner platforms, lump it into the commercial operation of our existing sales operations so that they could actually be selling the Guardian brand extended across other platforms, but with the same excellence. And the Guardian actually has the opportunity to sell a distributed campaign, whereas the social platform sells the social platform that may have a bunch of kind of watered down voices present on it. But they're never going to be able to sell this distributed campaign across multiple platforms that is a function of the voice of the brand. Now that's the case for The Guardian. That's probably the case for the New York Times. That's the case for those brands that have enormous, kind of de facto brand recognition. It starts to water down as you go down the tail. But having the option to at least manage the yield so that you can decide, just looking at math, whether or not your sales operation can sell it for more than the social platform, or if they can, then fine. But we need to start asking these platforms to not just launch things that require our content, but to launch them with the ability for us to monetize it, and launch them with the ability for us to leverage the data that results from people engaging with our content on those platforms, so that we can improve our ability to innovate the products and so that we can improve our ability to monetize in general. And so these are the things that I spend most of my time thinking about, and I'm glad I have the most minutes left for questions because that's when things get interesting. So,
questions? Okay, hang on just a second. Got to move a little faster.
Hey, Dave. So I was wondering if you, and maybe other people here have used it, but I was just writing down a few notes as you're doing your talk, about two-pronged question. One is whether you've seen or anyone has done embedded donate buttons within Twitter and Facebook. I feel like I've seen that, but I'm drawing a blank.
Yeah.
And what if that would be interesting? And my second part question is, I don't think on the news organizations who do sponsored content, whether those sponsored content is shared on their social platform. So if you're trying to monetize on your own website, but then you have a big social network and you share it there. I mean, the ethics of that one, but two, whether that is another way to get more content. So it's
when I was at YouTube, there was a share button that was limited to nonprofits, or there was a donate button that was limited to nonprofits, and then also when I was there, and these policies change from time to time, which is also great fun to manage if you're a publisher. The donate button, I think, may have been extended or may have been deprecated on YouTube. And because of the technology that was underlying it was a function of Wallet, which was going through a lot of transitions when I was there. And the policy was kind of tough to discern. So sometimes it's there, sometimes it's not. Now, one of the things that I was at F8 last week in San Francisco, and one of the things that I was really excited about was that at the end of the video on Facebook, you can actually link out. Now, that was never allowed at YouTube for obvious business reasons that kind of sucked for the publisher. But if you can link out, that's a step in the right direction. At least that gives you something where you can then start to figure out, well, what's the purpose of putting a video on Facebook? Well, I can link out at the end of it.
The only catch is that's only the paid model. On all
Well,
Hang on, Chip. Hang on, just so.
okay, I mean, yeah, my understanding was when you put a video in, you can actually add a link to link out, but not when it's not an ad buy, it's just a video that I put up on my page.
Yes, you can link out there. I'm sorry.
Okay.
So I thought you were talking about in a way to monetize. Never mind.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's one step. Now, I think there's about 1,000 things that I think would be much more scaled in terms of their impact from an economic perspective beyond that. But at least they're realizing that there needs to be some way for publishers to actually have the ability.
Hi, I just wanted to jump in on Facebook because that was the big news last week.
Yeah.
Of course, the value.
And also, I'm no expert on Facebook. I was just at F8. That's all I know. So.
But it's the question. You know, you're raising the trickiest of tricky questions of all for publishers. Mm-hmm. You got to go on the platforms to get audience, but you can't monetize that. So, what should publishers do, especially now with Facebook? You know, offering for publishers to put everything in their player.
Yeah, from a video perspective, I think it's important for us as an industry to all have a sense for what we all are going to be asking Facebook for. I think that one of the challenges of the situation is the asymmetrical engagement that it currently describes the nature of the relationship between Facebook and the industry as well as Google and the industry. If we can address that asymmetry by just getting clear in our heads as to what we need, and then have 1,000 voices all saying the same thing, and that it's also going to be in the best interest of Facebook because I want it to be a value add to both partners. I mean, I think the thing that has been a focus of my career in partnerships is to do those kinds of things where I'm not trying to extract value from one party to the other. I'm trying to grow a pie so that both parties can be viable. And we need both parties to be viable over time. Like, I think the advertising business was amazing as far as supporting journalism in the US since World War II. We need another economic model that will support journalism in the digital economy for another 100 years. And so it has to be a viable thing for both the platform and the publisher.
Doesn't this sort of necessitate breaking a dependency model, and in fact, organizations, especially the ones that create lots of content that is monetizable, that they create the distribution mechanisms in order to quickly, in order to offset? I mean, if that's going to be built as you're describing it,
Yeah.
there's a lot of work to be done inside most organizations, is there not?
I don't know if the answer is we publishers need to come up with our own alternative to the dominant platforms, because other industries have finely tuned supply chains where there are partners that are working in concert and have been for hundreds of years, and so I think there will be a way for us to evolve the nature of our industry such that the supply chain is composed of distinct companies with their distinct interests, but they're aligned in a way that allows for our interests to be aligned and allows us to have a viable opportunity. And when you start to really tinker too much with trying to, that'll be natural. I think there'll be a natural desire to try and own as much of the supply chain as you can. Although there are things, I mean, I like the idea that Facebook has a singular focus in developing that platform. I like the idea that The Guardian has a singular focus on journalism. When you start to try and expand those focuses, it's really hard to do that in a way that scales across an entire economy. So I think we need to have distinct parties working together in a supply chain. So,
Anybody else with about, yep, hang on.
That supply chain, would that supply chain that Facebook has developed be equipped to support democracy?
that's not Facebook's job. I think it's the journalist's job. I mean, I
Does
think,
that
and
make-
if they
but does that
screw
make
around
us-
with democracy, it's our job to hold them accountable and
But does
report
that
on
make
that.
us bigger than a product on the supply chain?
What's that?
Doesn't that make us bigger than just one product on the supply chain?
Well, I think I mean, my opinion is that is the most important role in the supply chain.
Okay.
But I think that there are ways to access the economy that require multiple parties. But I think that ours is the most important role in the supply chain. And also, I think that, and last thought here is that the last several years we've seen and a steady, kind of the part of the supply chain that is represented by the platforms has absorbed a massive disproportionate percentage of the value of the supply chain. Because these things get launched, they scale crazily, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, Pinterest, well, that's going to unseat so-and-so, or now Facebook video is going to unseat YouTube, or whatever. These things launch, they go so fast, they get to 1 billion users, like in record time. Every single one gets to 1 billion users faster than the last one, and then they start to kind of peter out. They can only get so big. There's only 7.5 billion people in the world right now. It can only get so big. But that, for the last 10 years, has relegated content to queen status rather than king, if you just look at the economics. Now, once they've reached a scale that they actually have reached a certain size, and now they actually have to start increasing the value of that equity by virtue of improving the experience that happens on the platform, that requires us. I'm basically pursuing my career with this thesis that content will regain king status, because these platforms have reached a steady state that now requires it, which didn't before. So, yeah, hence the move from Google to The Guardian.
Good stuff. Dave Gehring with The Guardian.